Hi, I'm Bill Bradley. Join me for a recent excerpt of American Voices. Broadway. The curtain goes up. The audience cheers. People are mesmerized. Perhaps they're inspired, or left in tears, or maybe they're left with a different way of looking at their own lives. It's the allure of the theater, and my next guest had a great and real window into that world. Lani Azenberg moved to New York City to be a dancer. She went on to become a stage manager. Her credits include Broadway hits like Cats and They're Playing Our Song. Lani is also married to the famed Broadway producer Manny Azenberg, and she's known the great playwrights of our time. I'm very glad that Lani is here now on American Voices. Lani, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about your parents and what first interested you in the arts and in dance.
Well, my mother had been a dancer on Broadway. She was in the
Really?
original Annie Get Your Gun with Ethel Merman in the early 40s. And she moved back home to Seattle and she opened a ballet school. So that was my mom. My father was the concertmaster of the Seattle Symphony for many, many years. And I grew up in a household where there was music and dance going on, sort of swirling around me all the time.
Really? You got any particular memories?
Well, my father, he would go down into the basement every morning and he would practice whatever part he was going to play in the symphony orchestra that night. He called it noodling.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like he was playing, the symphony down from in the basement, but he was practicing what he needed to practice. And it just was normal. And then, of course, my mother, well, the ballet studio was actually in our backyard. It was a separate building. And that's where I went after school. Or I just started ballet lessons at age 3.
What'd you like about it?
I think, the music in the studio. She always had a live pianist. I don't know how she found somebody on
Really?
Bainbridge Island, Washington, which is where I grew up, out in the country. But she did. There was always a pianist. And the studio, the smell of the studio, the mirrors, the bar, the floor that bounced. These are things that I remember and noticed as a child. And I also loved performing right away. And all I was in were, ballet recitals. But I loved dancing in front of an audience.
What was it that made you feel good?
There was an exhilaration. I mean, I didn't think about this as a child, but you're physically exerting yourself to music. And then there's an audience out there. You can feel them. And then there's applause at the end. So hopefully there was.
So you had this childhood of exposure to arts and found a passion in dance. But there you are in Bainbridge Island, the state of Washington.
Yes.
Now, it's a long way from there to New York. And the question is, did your mother influence you, or who influenced you to move to New York City all the way from Bainbridge Island?
My mother, who had lived in New York for many years while she was dancing, she told me stories about New York. She kind of turned her life there into some kind of a fairy tale. I'm sure it was not. I'm sure her life was very hard there, but she loved it. And she would just tell me stories about riding the subway. I knew about the Hasidic Jews who rode the BMT to Brooklyn. I knew that story when I was about 5. And and she I don't know why, it made an impression on her. And she told me about a Thanksgiving dinner she had by herself in a restaurant called the White Turkey, and it had white tablecloths, and it was just the most amazing thing ever. She turned these stories, she made them into fairy tales for me. I thought it was the most wonderful place ever. But seriously, I really kind of always knew somehow I was going to go to New York and try to dance, make a living as a dancer. after I graduated from high school. There was really
Mhm.
no discussion of college in my family.
Is that right?
I remember I was a junior in high school, and the guidance counselor came to speak to our class about college choices. And now you have to understand the choices there that anyone was talking about might have been Olympic Junior College and maybe University of Washington, maybe,
Right.
Harvard and Princeton, and they were names I never heard of. And well, everybody was very interested, everyone in the class. And I thought, well, maybe I should be interested. So I took home the brochure from whatever school, and I remember talking about it with my mother, and she didn't say very much. And that was just one day. And then I
Mhm.
really was focused on how I was going to save the money
And
and
get
get
there.
myself to New York,
So,
which I did.
your mother was a dancer, and she was a serious dancer. She was in all these shows. What
She
do you remember a
was.
couple of stories she told you? I was dancing with this person or that person, and they did this, and
I don't, yes, she told me a story about a famous choreographer named Jack Cole, who I don't know if people still know who he was, but he choreographed Man of La Mancha
mm-hmm,
and a lot of movies in
mm-hmm,
Hollywood. The movie of Kiss Me Kate, actually, he, I think, worked on. But she went to an audition. He was for him in New York. And the audition was, it happened in a theater. Auditions back then used to happen in empty theaters. So the line of young women would line up with their backs against the back wall of the theater, and you did this step called, not to be too technical here, but an assemblée and a grand plie on the right side, and then your left leg on assemblée, which is a huge jump, and then you do a plie, you bend your knees and go down to the floor, and you continue one after another, moving forward. And if you made it all the way forward to the edge of the stage, maybe you got the job. Um, the point was he was looking for really strong dancers with thigh
right.
muscles.
I
Um,
can feel that right down my legs.
so, I mean, that was Jack Cole, and he was tough. He was known for being very tough. And she worked with Ethel Merman in Annie Get Your Gun, and then many years later, well, I was 17, but and I ended up working in a show with Ethel Merman, and
Really?
yeah,
Did you
yes.
tell Ethel Merman about your
I
mother?
I did. It was a really stupid remark. I said, Miss Merman, my mother was in a show with you. She was in Annie Get Your Gun, and Miss Merman, to her credit, just smiled politely and said, "Oh, really?" And I didn't realize it would age her when I made this remark, but I
Right.
did. Yes. So
Well,
yeah,
look, so here you are. Your mother encouraged you. You take the big leap. What did you fly or did you train or how'd you get to New
I
York?
I it was the first time I'd ever been on a plane. I didn't go to my high school graduation. I remember I didn't care about it. It cost $25 to rent the cap and gown, and I put every cent into $75 to get me the student rate on Northwest Airlines to Seattle in 1966.
Well, so here you arrive in New York. I mean, you want to be a dancer. Well, what do you do? I mean, there are probably thousands of women,
Uh,
young women, or even
yes.
men who want to dance. What do you do when you arrive?
I had a place to live because I heard about where a dancer who had gone a year before to New York, where she lived. It was a women's residence on West 87th Street. My mother had told me, you need to get a job from 4 to midnight. From 4 to midnight, because during the day you need to be in dance class and have your time free to go to auditions. Otherwise, you will be in a 9 to 5 job for the rest of your life.
Hmm.
So it was very good advice. I listened to her. I got the New York Times and I looked for jobs, and I got a job answering burglar alarms. from 4 to midnight on 10th Avenue and 54th Street. And at the same time, I started going to dance class because I knew where to go, basically. I knew the names of the teachers that I should study with. In those days, you would buy a newspaper called Backstage that came out once a week, and they listed all of the auditions that were happening in the near future. So I went to my first audition, which was for the original production of Cabaret.
Mm-hmm.
I was not exactly right for that show, being 17. But anyway, there was some woman there in the audience. I don't know what she was doing there. She stopped me on the way out of the stage door and she said, "Lani, are you coming to the audition next week for Where's Charlie?" I said, "Yes, I was planning to be there." So I go, and I actually end up getting the job.
Hmm.
And the choreographer was Agnes DeMille.
Huh.
Agnes DeMille, she's an extremely famous choreographer. She choreographed Oklahoma and Carousel and Brigadoon,
Wow.
kind of like Hamilton changed musical theater. Oklahoma changed musical theater back in the 50s.
Hmm.
So to be hired by her was a huge deal. And the little lady who stopped me on my way out of the stage door was her assistant. And she knew,
So she was her scout. She saw the
I
talent.
guess she was.
Yeah.
So,
Amazing. So now
yeah.
you're on the big stage. And how did you, I mean, the same question that I asked earlier, what'd you love about dance and, being out there and being on stage?
I always loved the performance, the performing aspect of it. But, there's also a camaraderie of your colleagues, the
Right.
people you meet, the other dancers, the rest of the cast,
The
and if
team.
you're yeah, yes, and we all had similar stories, or we were all there for the same reason. We loved to dance and we wanted to perform and we wanted to somehow try to make a living at doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And how would you describe the kind of dance that you did?
well, I was a ballet trained dancer, which
Mm-hmm.
back in those days was meaningful because the choreographers, even if the show was going to be jazz or like Cabaret certainly was not ballet, but that day that choreographer gave a ballet combination so that I could usually get kept through the first combination.
The first combination, meaning the first thing that the director would ask you to do?
Yes, a series of steps, usually a
Mm-hmm.
series of ballet steps across the floor, in groups of 4. I managed to get through that pretty regularly. And then after that, depending on what kind of show it was, well, Where's Charlie was about English students in a boarding school, high school age. So I was perfect for that part. And it was DeMille who was interested in ballet trained dancers. And then after that, the next Broadway show I did was for Michael Kidd, The Rothschilds. Michael Kidd is also from the ballet world and would want his dancers to be trained in ballet technique.
So how long did you dance before you made the next move?
Probably for 10 or 12 years.
Wow. So that's a real full career as a dancer.
Well, yeah, I also by accident became a stage manager, but even before that, I was a dance captain.
What does that mean, dance captain?
That dance captain means you are in charge of maintaining the choreography and the staging, the musical staging of the show.
Mm-hmm.
If things are getting sloppy, you call a rehearsal and you clean
Mm-hmm.
up the dance
Oh,
numbers.
so you're a mini coach.
I am a mini coach. Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you also work with the actors because the actors, most of the time, will also be included in the musical numbers. And so you need to work with them, and you learn to work with actors in a different way than you would work with dancers.
Really? How?
Well, they don't like to count. So, dance steps happen on counts, and the actors, I mean, this is a terrible generalization, but for the most part, actors prefer not to count. And also they say, well, why do I move over there? I mean,
Oh, yeah, they
to
want
put it,
explanation.
what is my motivation? And the famous line from some director is your paycheck. I mean,
Right. It's
but
like it's like the coach tells you to go from the foul line to the baseline, and you say, "Well, why is that?" The
oh
answer is because I
no,
told you so.
that's exactly right. Particularly in a long running show where things are set and you have new people coming in, or and understudies going on, and you need to maintain what we're doing here
Hmm.
eight times a week. So that's the dance captain's job.
So then you became a stage manager. I mean, for people who don't know, tell us what a stage manager does and what you liked about being stage manager.
Well, a stage manager's job is to maintain the show as it was left by the director and choreographer on opening night. Your job, whatever specific duties you may have, that is your responsibility. Someone told me that I listened to, and that's how I looked at my job, whether I was getting the coffee for some actor or calling the show or rehearsing understudies or whatever. That's the job. And it was an absolute accident. I never thought of being a stage manager.
Well, it sounds to me like there's a story there, Lonnie. How'd that
Well,
happen?
no, well, we were doing a tour of the Rothschilds, so I had done the show already for a year and a half. I knew it, and the general manager came into a company meeting, and he said, "Okay, we need a second assistant stage manager, and we're going to take that person out of the chorus, and it pays $15 more a week.
Huh.
And is anybody interested?" And for some reason, and I think it was the $15 for sure, which in 76 or wherever it was, it meant something in my paycheck. And I tentatively raised my hand. And the general manager smiled and thought, in fact, I know, he thought, oh, how cute. The girl dancer, wants to be a stage manager. Whatever. I get the job. And I very quickly find out it's much more interesting to stand behind the stage manager who's calling the light cues and the set cues than to be listening to gossip in the girls' dressing room very
Hmm.
quickly. And I this was not part of my job as a second assistant. I really had I typed up the contact sheet. I did
Sure.
things that I knew I could do. But I started watching the stage manager call the show, and I thought, this is really fun and interesting and technical. And he was very nice, and he let me put on the headset, and slowly I started to call the light cues, which were, simple.
Like, you mean the stage manager is essentially saying, lights up, lights down, lights over here, lights there.
Well, in the middle of a scene, and let's say there are some light cues, you're calling lights 25, go. Lights 26, go. Which it's all set on line readings, on various things. The end of the
Hmm.
scene, the lights
Hmm.
dim, you call that cue. But my point was, you can't kill anyone with moving scenery. I wasn't calling cues that were going to move scenery. The calling of that show over a period of 4 or 5 months, the Rothschilds, it turned out to be the most difficult show I ever called
Hmm.
because it was a huge show scenically. There was heavy scenery and a lot of light cues and a big cast, and it turned out to be and when you start and you learn, and it's the most difficult show, everything after that is easy.
Right. There's more of my conversation with Lani Azenberg. That's coming up next. plus a licensed coffee expert. Coming up.
Coffee will be in the roaster for a certain amount of minutes, and then it starts popping like popcorn. It's called the first crack.
You're listening to American Voices on Sirius XM. I'm Bill Bradley. Stay with us. I'm Bill Bradley. We're back now on American Voices on Sirius XM. We're continuing my conversation with Lani Azenberg. She moved from Seattle to New York to become a dancer and then went on to become a stage manager. Quite a career. So Lani, in your years as stage manager, there must have been moments where you faced some difficulties. I mean, you worked with big stars and certain other difficulties. How'd you handle that?
Well, so the most difficult part of stage managing, I think, is dealing with people. Calling a show is technical, you learn it. But dealing with personalities in your attempt to get the show on the best you can, actors are, emotional and and a little nutty sometimes.
Give us an example without calling names. You don't have to call names, but
well, certainly one of the most difficult times was I kept an actress off for lateness. It was on Cats, and she was the leading lady. And it seems on Wednesday matinee, she just couldn't get there on time. And back in the 80s, there were no cell phones. So what you called, if it was a 2:00 show, half hour is your call. You were there at 1:30 and signed in. She had been late multiple times, and she did not call. You called you called the payphone at the stage door, and you said, you could say, "I'm on my way," or I'm stuck. I'm not going to be there. She would never call. And
so you didn't even know if she was going to show up.
Yeah, no. And I don't know if you remember Cats, but it takes a while to get into the Cats makeup. You have to do your makeup.
Absolutely,
and
the whiskers.
Costume. And so at about 1:45, I just made a decision. I called the understudy and I said, "You're going on, get dressed." And so the leading lady waltzes in around 1:55 and finds out that she's not on. And that I had made that decision, and she didn't like it at all. And she got physical and kind of pushed me up against the wall in my office. And yeah, it was not nice. And I held it together, but I don't get into cat fights, so to speak. So I held it together until she vented and left the room.
Was she on time after that?
I think she was. It was not okay. And it also, the rest of the company was looking to me to take charge of this situation. And I knew that. And that was additional pressure. And I think back, should I have done it? I think I should have. It was the right thing to do. She's getting paid a lot of money. You can show up on time.
That is for sure. Did anybody in the cast say something to you like, "Hey, good call, Lani"?
No, they didn't.
They were now afraid of you.
I don't really know. But it was the 80s. There was a lot of just stuff going on in the 80s that I kind of was not even aware of in my naivete. But there were dressing rooms that were kind of wild. And I had to go in one night and I dumped 2 bottles of scotch down the sink because the girl dancers were drinking during the show on Saturday night. And that had been going on for a while. And, it's dangerous.
Right.
There were lifts. You're interacting physically with other dancers. It's dangerous.
Right. But that's you asserting authority in a real way.
I don't know. I don't know how I did that. I ran into this one dancer on the street the other day. She said, "You owe me 2 bottles of scotch." I said, "Okay, fine."
You mean recently?
Yes, I saw her on 9th Avenue. Yes.
Oh my God. And how many years ago was that?
Well, Cats was opened in 82.
Oh my goodness.
She remembered. I had forgotten that, but she remembered.
So you had this great life in the theater as a dancer, and then you moved up to being the stage manager. And in the course of that, you met Manny Azenberg and got
Yes.
married. And
Yeah.
in the context of all that, I mean, you've known great playwrights of our time. I mean, can you give
Yes.
us a little, once over, a little vignette or two, reflections about them? Let's start with Tom Stoppard, the great
Well,
British playwright.
Tom Stoppard, I never worked with him, sadly. To be in the rehearsal room with the playwright is an amazing and very exciting thing, even if you're the stage manager. But Tom, I met because Manny produced two of his plays and the movie Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So I know him socially. When I first met him, I thought, oh my God, what am I going to say to Tom Stoppard? What if I'm seated next to him or whatever? And it turned out I found him, and to this day find him very easy to talk to.
Hmm.
Back in the day, we both had young children, and that was always a conversation starter, and he was very happy to talk about his boys. And
A lot of times great writers have great sensitivities. So
yeah,
he was sensitive to you.
I think so. But he's very nice.
How about Neil Simon?
Neil Simon, I just loved. I had the privilege of working on, it's at least three plays, maybe there's a fourth, from the beginning as a stage manager. Back in those days, the script would be handed out to the actors, and then rehearsals would start. And he would go off by himself, maybe even out in the hallway or into another studio somewhere, and he would rewrite on a yellow pad, and he'd bring in the handwritten pages. There'd be three or four maybe, and I would go
Really?
type them up. Yeah, and I would Xerox them and then hand them out to the actors, so they would then that night take them home, and that would be the new scene that they would need to study. But that interaction was so, well, I felt trusted, I felt special. He was also funny and just really wonderful to be around. And, he had no problem with rewriting. If this line didn't work, he would come up with something else. He said it's not written in stone. I mean, I think he said that to Manny.
Let me double back to a comment you made a minute or two ago, where you said being in the rehearsal room with the playwright was thrilling. Tell us about that. Nobody has been in a rehearsal room with a great playwright.
Well, the first day of rehearsal, everyone's there, like the producer and the managers and maybe a couple of the other producers, and then everybody meets, and then that day finishes. And then the next day, the rehearsals really start. And in the room would be the director, the actors, probably two stage managers, and the author, the playwright.
Mm-hmm.
They usually start reading around the table, or maybe they're even up on their feet, but you are quietly witnessing the birth of a play by
The
whoever.
emergence of a work of art.
Yeah, and you see, it's the personalities and how the director deals with this and or doesn't.
Do you have any specific stories about that?
Well, I worked on chapter 2, which was a play by Neil, and the director was Herb Ross. We were out in California, we were rehearsing out there, and the leading lady that had been hired after the first 2 days, we knew she was gonna be fired. It was not good. And Manny knew an actress and had her sort of on standby, and she came to the next day of rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 4-character play. The 3 other actors are what we call studio actors. They are not from the musical theater. They need a lot of attention and time to find their characters and all of this. And then this new actress that comes in, she's Miss Musical Comedy. And she's not on the same level as, not ability, but way of working. And Herb Ross, he did what is a structured improvisation for several days with this actress and the other three actors, integrating her into their
Uh-huh.
way of working and bringing them a bit into where she's coming from. And
That's
that play
fascinating.
would not have worked I believe, with this actress, or the play wouldn't have worked at all if this director had not been able to make this happen. And you could watch this when you're you're observing, you're also writing down the blocking.
What does that
Yeah.
mean? Writing down the
You're writing
blocking.
down who stands where, who enters upstage, downstage,
Right.
stage right,
Right.
stage left, what the movement is while you're there. That's one of the things that you're doing.
And the amazing thing to me as you tell the story is that the actors were amenable to move a little bit one way, and she was amenable. It took a real leader as a director.
He was, because I can tell you the exact opposite of story where the director came in and the actors, he was not capable of making this happen. And interestingly enough, Herb Ross started out as a dancer, and
Uh-huh.
actually, along with going back to the Jack Cole story, the other story my mother told me is that Herb Ross took dance ballet class with my mother.
Oh, my
And
goodness. So here
yes,
you are all these years later in the
yes,
same production with Herb
correct.
Ross, your mother's
Yes,
mentor.
yes. But the story is that Herb Ross would come into the ballet class with his miniature poodle, and the miniature poodle would sit very quietly underneath the bar next to Herb as everyone is doing their bar exercises in the studio. He was tough. He was intimidating. He scared the living daylights out of me, actually. And I never had a problem with him, but he was intimidating. I'll put it that way. But he was very good.
Well, Lani, that's quite a career. I'm sure many of the listeners did not have any idea what goes in to creating a play on Broadway, a musical play sometimes.
Yes.
I'm sure that I didn't, and I've seen hundreds of them over the years, but I had no idea. So it's
Okay.
really great. Thanks.
You're
So I
welcome.
understand, just one last question. You came to New York to be a dancer, and I understand now that you still take dance class twice a week.
I
So
do.
how's your love for dance changed over the years?
It hasn't. I still love to dance. I love to move to music. I'll be one of the first people up at a wedding on a dance floor. Even if it's that, I really, I go to the ballet. I'm actually going to see the Martha Graham Dance Company down at the Joyce next week. I love moving to music. I think that's kind of it.
You've had a lifelong passion.
Yeah, I have. And I'm happy about it. And I'm very happy, I have to say, about my years in the theater. I think they were special. It was a special time, and I'm very grateful for them.
Listen, I thank you so much for coming on American Voices and sharing with us the love of theater that's so obvious as you talk about the people and the problems and solutions. It's great. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you.
I've been speaking with Lani Azenberg. Find out more, visit us on Facebook. Our Facebook page is American Voices with Senator Bill Bradley. On Instagram, it's Bill Bradley on Sirius XM.
Memory, turn your face to the moonlight. Let your memory lead you. Open up, enter in. If you find there the meaning.
Thank you for listening to American Voices here on my YouTube channel. For more interviews celebrating the goodness and creativity of the American people, click the subscribe button below.